37. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 You sing alongside. Narayanam Namaskrityam Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudiraye Shunvatam Swakatha Krishna Punya Shravana Kirtana Hridayantasto Bhadrani Vidhunoti Suritsatam Nashtaprayeshva Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Nashtiki Grantra Srimad Bhagavatam ki Jai. Today we'll be reading Canto 1, Chapter 15, verse 37 from the chapter The Pandavas Retired Timely. Shall we start?
Yes.
Yudhishthirastat parisparanam buddha Pure च राष्ट्रे च गृहे तथात्मनि विभाव्य लोभन् ऋतजिर्महिंसनादि अधर्मचक्रं गमनाय पर्यधात् युधिष्ठिरस्तात् परिसर्पणं बुधा पुरे च राष्ट्रे च गृहे तथात्मनि विभाव्य लोभान् ऋतजिह्महिंसनादि अधर्मचक्रं गमनाय पर्यधात् युधिष्ठिरस्तात् परिसर्पणं बुधा पुरे च राष्ट्रे च गृहं तथात्मनि विभाव्य लोभान् ऋतजिह्महिंसनादि अधर्मचक्रं गमनाय पर्यधात्
Yudhishthirastat parisarpanam buddha.
युधिष्ठिरस्तात् परिसर्पणं बुधा
Pure cha rashtre cha grihani.
पुरे च राष्ट्रे च गृहे तथात्मनि
Vibhavya lobhan himsanadi.
विभाव्य लोभान् ऋतजिह्महिंसनादि अधर्मचक्रं गमनाय पर्यधात्. Word to word translation and purport by His Divine Grace, Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, Srila Prabhupada ki Jai. Yudhishthirah, Maharaj Yudhishthir, Tat, that, Parisarpanam, expansion, Buddha, thoroughly experienced, Pure, in the capital, Cha, as also, Rashtre, in the state, Cha, and Grihe, at home, Tatha, as also, Atmani, in person, Vibhavya, observing, Lobha, avarice, Anrita, untruth,
untruth,
jihma, diplomacy, himsana adi, violence, envy, adharma, irreligion, chakram, a vicious circle, gamanaya, for departure, paryadhat, dressed himself accordingly. Translation: Maharaj Yudhishthir was intelligent enough to understand the influence of the age of Kali, characterized by increasing avarice, falsehood, cheating, and violence throughout the capital, state, home, and among individuals. So he wisely prepared himself to leave home and he dressed accordingly. Purport: the present age is influenced by the specific qualities of Kali. Since the days of the Battle of Kurukshetra, about 5,000 years ago, the influence of the age of Kali began manifesting. And from authentic scriptures, it is learned that the age of Kali is still to run for 427,000 years. The symptoms of the Kali Yuga, as mentioned above, namely avarice, falsehood, diplomacy, cheating, nepotism, violence, and all such things are already in vogue. And no one can imagine what is going to happen gradually with further increase of the influence of Kali till the day of annihilation. We have already come to know that the influence of the age of Kali is meant for godless, so called civilized man. Those who are under the protection of the Lord have nothing to fear from this horrible age. Maharaj Yudhishthir was a great devotee of the Lord, and there was no necessity of his being afraid of the age of Kali. But he preferred to retire from active household life and prepare himself to go back home, back to Godhead. The Pandavas are eternal companions of the Lord, and therefore they are more interested in the company of the Lord than anything else. Besides that, being an ideal king, Maharaj Yudhishthir wanted to retire just to set an example for others. As soon as there is some young fellow to look after the household affairs, one should at once retire from family life to uplift oneself to spiritual realization. One should not rot in the dark well of household life till one is dragged out by the will of Yamaraj. Modern politicians should take lessons from Maharaj Yudhishthir about voluntary retirement from active life and should make room for the younger generation. Also, retired old gentlemen should take lessons from him and leave home for spiritual realization before forcefully being dragged away to meet death. ॐ अज्ञानतिमिरान्धस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनाशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मिलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। नमो विष्णुपादाय कृष्णपृष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदान्त स्वामिनिधि नामिने। नमस्ते सारस्वते देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेषा शून्यवादी पाश्चात्य देशतारिणे। जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्त वृंद। हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे। Thank you for joining today's class, dear devotees. I am not qualified to be speaking here. Please offer a prayer that may the right words come at the right time in the glorification of Srimad Bhagavatam. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. I always like to appreciate that you've given your time here, because Chanakya Pandit says, Ayusha Kshana Ekopi na labhya swarna koti vihi. Or as we know from popular culture, Iron Man's father said, not a second of time can be bought by Swarna Koti Vihi. From even with millions and millions of dollars, not a second of time can be purchased. So thank you all for giving me your time. I hope I can do justice to this verse of the Srimad Bhagavatam. In today's verse, we are reading about Maharaj Yudhishthir. This is from the chapter Pandavas Retire Timely. And as we've been continuing, the Pandavas are at the position where they take what we call in our what we call as Vanaprastha. So the Pandavas, along with Mother Draupadi, will be leaving for the Himalayas. And it is very important that although the verse states Yudhishtiras, Prabhupada makes it a point to say Maharaj Yudhishthir. So we discussed the other day that when someone is a Raja, he is conquered. Raja is a king who has conquered the externals. But a Maharaj is one who has conquered the internals. So that is why we say Maharaj Yudhishthir. And we also say many sannyasis in the ISKCON movement and even our own gurus, we call them Maharaj. They may not have conquered land per se, but they've conquered the harder enemy, that is the enemy within, that is the mind. So that's why we offer them all due respect and say Maharaj. So Maharaj Yudhishthir, as the translation says, was intelligent enough to understand the influence of the age of Kali. So we've seen, or we will see soon, about how Kali meets Parikshit Maharaj. And Maharaj Yudhishthir, he did not appoint any of his own sons. He appointed the son of, who's the father of Parikshit Maharaj? Abhimanyu. So that is, he's related to Arjuna, but he was made the king at that time. He was made the, you could say, Yuvraj. He was in his youth and he was appointed as the king at that point in time. And as Prabhupada says, when there is some young fellow to look after the household affairs, one should at once retire from family life. And as we were discussing the other day, in Hindi it is said, Ikyavan, Bavan, Tirpan. It means after you hit 51, you need to go to the one. You should leave for the forest. That's why we say Ikyavan, Bavan, Tirpan, 51, 52, 53. So one should take to Vanaprasthashram. And we know that what the Mahajanas show by example, everybody else would follow. Ideally should follow, but will follow. And to bring a little more meaning to the influence of the age of Kali, I would like to, I wouldn't sing the words, but I would like to bring Sri Hari Suri in his Bhakti Rasayana, where he talks about the intoxication of wealth. So he says, Shri Mad, the intoxication of wealth. And he says, he actually has two verses. In the first verse, he says, lag, that is lust, anger, and greed. It kind of lags our spiritual life. So it causes one to go to the Narakam, Yantim. So it goes to the abode of Yamaraj. Just having one of these, just having a little bit of lust or anger or greed is sufficient for one to find themselves in the doorsteps of Yamaraj. But Shri Mad, or the intoxication of wealth, is, you could say, so potent in a negative way that it brings all lust, anger, and greed, all three of them together. So Shri Mad is spoken of as being immensely or intensely more dangerous than having just one of lust, anger, greed. So you could say Srimad is like the worst. It would bring all three together. And Harisuri goes further and says, not just Srimad or the intoxication of wealth, but just having the association of wealth is sufficient for one to get lust, anger, and greed. And so in that verse, he says, he actually speaks about the four regulative principles and gives the example of people who are, in a way, not very intoxicated, but were in the association of a lot of wealth that caused them to break the regulative principles, and as a result, they found a lot of misfortune in their lives. So first, he gives the example of King Dasharath. Dasharath Maharaj was the father of Lord Ram. It is said that Dasharatha, he had the five knowledge gathering senses, and he had the 10 senses as a Ratha in his control. And then we have the example of Ravana, who is Dashamukha. He gave avenues for the 10 senses to take him in 10 different directions. So the difference between Dasharatha and Dashamukha, how Lord Ram was born in the dynasty of Dasharatha and was destroyed Dashamukha. So it's just like a similarity just to draw between them. But Harisuri says Dasharatha, he was such a great king, but because he had the association of wealth as he was a king, he accidentally killed Shravan Kumar, who was actually serving his blind parents, and then he received the curse of Shravan Kumar's parents. That since he led to the separation of them from their son, Dasharath will also feel the separation from his son, that is Lord Ram, come to be. So he broke the regulative principle of not exactly meat eating, but mercy. He was merciless in the fact that he was a king and he's supposed to show he has a prowess to face wild beasts everywhere. And in that position, he killed Shravan Kumar. So that's the first regulative principle. The second regulative principle, as this part comes just after the Damodar Leela, when Harisuri composes this verse, he says that Nalakuvera and Manigriva, they were also physically intoxicated by, you could say, alcoholic beverages, but more so by the intoxication of the wealth that they had, being the sons of Kuber. And as a result, that intoxication of wealth caused them to enjoy on the banks of Alaknanda, and not just displease Lord Shiva, but also displease Narad Muni and to receive the curse. So it was the intoxication of wealth. He sees the root cause behind it. Although it may seem that they were in a physically intoxicated state that they received such a position or such a curse as being the Yamalarjun trees in the courtyard of Nanda Maharaj, but it's actually the root cause was the wealth behind it. And then the third is Dyuta or gambling. And we know, the very first word in today's verse, Yudhishthir Maharaj, although he was, you could say, Dharma Putra, he was the son of Dharmaraj. And he was in a position of gambling only because he had something to put on stake. He had wealth to put on stake, right? So not just the intoxication of wealth, but even the association of wealth can mold one's actions into breaking one of the four regulator principles. So we have that. And the last one, actually, Hari Suri gives an example of two demons who are, you could say, inseparable, but then they meet a female known as Tilottama, and as a result, they fight amongst themselves and kill each other. They were so powerful that no one could kill them, but they could only kill they could only be destroyed if they kill each other. And they fought over a woman known as Tilottama, and as a result, they perished. But Hari Suri knows that maybe many might not know this pastime, so he also gives the example of Ravana. So he gives the example of Ravana, who had wealth, but he fell prey to lust. He was convicted of many, you could say, felons, and he was also cursed by Nalukvera himself. And if you go to Kashi, you can see even now there are what do you call commentaries by Ravana on the different Vedas, including especially the Rig Veda. But he was so learned; he was a learned Brahmin, but still he fell prey to lust simply because he had wealth with him. Not to say he had a very pious and chaste wife, Mandodari. I believe she's also a Kanya, one of the seven women who would regain their purity. But even then, it was only because of wealth that this was caused. So we see the same as a mirror for our society. In the 1760s, when the Industrial Revolution took place, it was only by the greed for wealth that people started working what we call now as 9 to 5 jobs. And like you could say the labor class would grind, and then the higher classes would enjoy the fruits of those activities. So in today's society, we see that economic development is given the highest preference. There is inflation to increase consumption, and there are so many different triggers for one to accumulate wealth. I mean, earlier the Brahmanas could live off of just donations from others, but now even the Brahmanas are, you could say, in a way, forced to invest their assets in a place that grows faster than inflation so that they can survive and maintain themselves. So that is such a precarious situation that we are all in. So when Maharaj Yudhishthir was the king, he was, I may be wrong, but he might have ruled for 36 years too. I don't remember the exact number, but maybe I'm wrong, but I will check that. But for those years, all of the residents had immense and abundance of the four Purusharthas, that is Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha, all four of them to the highest degree. And especially Moksha, because in today's lifetime, Dharma, Artha, Kama are given preference. Moksha is, kind of spoken of as taboo. So that goes to show that Yudhishthir was such a pious and suitable king. He was not the best warrior. He was neither the most learned. So I'm just comparing him with his other four illustrious brothers. He was not the most beautiful. He was not the most learned. He was not the strongest. He was not the best archer. But he was the strongest adherent to Dharma. Dharmo rakshati iti rakshitah. One who protects Dharma is protected by Dharma itself. And that was actually one of the answers that Yudhishthir gives to the questions that the Yaksha puts forth in the pond. So before we delve into that, we will see what Vyasadeva has to say about the Mahabharata. So Mahabharata is a very voluminous work, and not everybody would have the time or the good fortune to study it in depth. So Vyasadeva has taken out what is known as the Pancharatnam, or the 5 gems, 5 diamonds, 5 gems of the Mahabharata. So we will see what these 5 gems are. The first is called Vidura Samvad. It is Vidura speaking to Dhritarashtra. So that this is the conversation between Dhritarashtra and Vidura, where Vidura imparts the knowledge of detachment and um, higher successes to Dhritarashtra. The second one is called Sanat Sujatiyam. It is the discussion between Dhritarashtra and Sanat Sujata. The third is known as Yaksha Prashnam. It is a question and answer between Yudhishthir Maharaj and the Yaksha, which we will look at briefly today. The fourth is known as Bhagavad Gita. It is spoken of, but it's the words of Krishna himself. And the last is the Vishnu Sahasranama, which was spoken by Bhishma Dev to Yudhishthir in the presence of Krishna. So the last two are kind of, they come together in the sense the Bhagavad Gita was spoken by the Lord, and Vishnu Sahasranam was spoken for the Lord. And then we have in between, in sandwich, we have Yaksha Prashnam, which is very interesting because in the other four, the speaker is given the spotlight. It is Sanat Sujata spoke. And this thing, Vidura Niti, Vidura spoke. And Bhagavad Gita, Krishna was speaking. And Vishnu Sahasranama, Bhishma Dev spoke. So the spotlight is on who spoke or who gave the knowledge out. But in the case of Yaksha Prashnam, Yudhishthir gave the answers. So it should have been Yudhishthir Uttaram, right? It should have been the answers of Yudhishthir. But you could say the emphasis is laid on Yaksha Prashnam. What are the questions that the Yaksha asked? Because it goes to show that Yudhishthir was already known far and wide for the knowledge, for the knowledge of dharma that he possessed. You could say he was the living embodiment of Dharmaraj, who was on the, you could say, in addition to have Vedura also on the planet at that time. But it was the questions were so good that they kind of overshadow the answers. In the sense, the questions are so important. So the emphasis is laid on Yaksha Prashna. So we will look at a few of the questions. I remember the last time we spoke about Yudhishthir Maharaj, I asked a few questions as a pop quiz in the Bhagavatam class, but I will not repeat the questions, except maybe one or two. But we will look at some of the newer questions. There were 124 questions that were asked. But I will just give a 5-minute backstory for what happens. So this is during the 12-year of exile that the Pandavas had faced. And in one of those years, they were closely approaching the end of the 12th year, and 13th year was supposed to be Agyatavas, or they had to be incognito, and nobody should detect who they were. If they were detected, then they need to repeat another 12 years of exile. So as they were approaching that, they wanted to take shelter of King Virat's kingdom. And while they were on their way to the kingdom of King Virat, there were a few Brahmins. There was a Brahmin who was performing his yagya. So I think, I don't know what the English term for it is. It's called the Arani sticks, or they're sticks that are used by the Brahmin to perform the Agnihotra. So I think you would see that they would pour the ghee into the. So at that time, a deer, I guess, took the Arani sticks and ran away. And the Brahmana saw that there were Pandavas who were there, and he requested Yudhishthir Maharaj to help him retrieve the stick so that he can continue his sacrifice. And at that time, Yudhishthir asks Sahadev to go. He's the smallest of them. He said, "This is a simple task. Sahadev should be able to handle it with no fuss." And Sahadev went. And at some point in time, after some point in time, Sahadev did not return. And Yudhishthir was a little concerned. Okay, maybe Nakula, you also go. Your brother has not returned. And so Nakula also went. He didn't return as well. Then he sent Arjuna. Now, if Arjuna doesn't return, he knows something is seriously wrong. So he sends Bala Bhim, strong Bhim. Our Chota Bhim isn't here, but Bhimsen. But even Bhimsen did not come back. So Maharaj Yudhishthir was obviously a little puzzled. Surely there must be something at play. So he went himself. And then he saw, as he was passing by, he was also quite thirsty. And he saw that there was a pond. And as he was approaching the pond to take some water, he saw that his 4 brothers were in a comatose state lying down there. And so he was going to accept little water and then revive them. But then the yaksha in the form of a swan tells him that you need to answer my questions. It's like the who wants to be a millionaire kind of thing. So you need to answer all the questions, and then you will get the final reward. You would get them all revived. So Maharaj Yudhishthir, he knows this is all up his alley and he's all prepared for it. And 124 questions were asked, and he gave the perfect answers. You could say perfect answers to perfect questions. So why I bring this up is because at the end of the Yaksha Prashnam, Yudhishthir asks for actually Dharmaraj reveals himself and gives three boons to Yudhishthir, and Yudhishthir asks for some very specific thing in the very end, and why that ties in with today's verse. We will look at that. So why it is important that Yudhishthir was chosen to be spotlighted there was because he was the one who was always beyond suspicion. No one would suspect him. He was Agyata Shatru to the extent that even Duryodhana, Dushasan, all Shakuni, everybody respected and were happy that he performed the Rajasuya sacrifice. Actually, Yudhishthir did not want to perform the sacrifice himself. He only performed it because he was coaxed. He was told that Maharaj Pandu did not attain the highest abode. He was in Dharmaraja's abode because he had some residual desires at the time of his death due to his uniting with Madri at that point in time. But as at that point in time, he did not attain the highest abode. But by performing the Rajasuya sacrifice, Maharaj Pandu would be all of his desires will be completely fulfilled, and as a result, he will attain the highest abode. So then he was asked to perform the Rajasuya sacrifice, and he used it as an opportunity to glorify Krishna, to have him as the you could say the first person who offered the greatest worship and adoration at that ceremony. And even at the time of after the Kurukshetra war, when he was asked to take up kingship, he was like, "I will not take up the kingship that is slain with the blood of all of these valiant warriors." And he was hell bent on not taking up the crown. Even Krishna's advice or Krishna's recommendation was not sufficient, and he had to go in front of Bhishma Dev. And then Krishna and everyone tricked him to, if Bhishma Dev sees you in these sullen clothes, he will not be satisfied. So you please dress up and go as a royal entourage in front of Bhishma Dev. Then he will be satisfied, because a dying man's wish should be taken into account. And as a result, Yudhishthira Maharaj goes in front of Bhishma Dev dressed up in royal attire, and that really pleased Bhishma Dev. Actually, the longest part of the entire Mahabharata is what Bhishma Dev tells Yudhishthira Maharaj. All the advice and everything that is given to Yudhishthir is at that point on the deathbed. It's very interesting to note that actually it comes up as one of the questions. Maybe I'll discuss it then. Okay, maybe not. We may not have enough time. So what I want to say was, Krishna waited for Bhishma Dev to be on the deathbed for him to speak about dharma, because of a very subtle point that Narayana Bhattadri mentions in his commentary on the Mahabharata, where he mentions that when Draupadi was in her menstruation cycle and she was kept inside, and she was not in an able position to come to the assembly, and when Yudhishthira gambled her, it was when Dushasan went to get her, because the Pratikaman could not bring her. So at that point in time, there were a few drops of blood of Draupadi that fell down. And then she asked Bhishma Dev at that point in time, how can Yudhishthir gamble me when he was already lost in the gambling, right? Because a husband and wife are seen as one package, not as two individuals. So when he is already lost, how can he put me at stake? I was already lost at that point. So he had no rights to put me on stake at that time. At that time, she put it forth to the assembly, and no one was willing to counter her argument. And she specifically asked Bhishma Dev, because she knew Bhishma Dev was among all of those. Obviously, Vidura, he put up his hand and said no, and then he was banished at that point. But she knew Bhishma Dev was her last resort, and probably very good shelter, actually. He was Mahajana. Right? So maybe he will protect Dharma, and he will give me the truth at this point in time. But at that point in time, that's the only mistake that Bhishma Dev performed. And he said, well, it's a gray area, I don't know. He said it. And Krishna waited for Bhishma Dev to lose every drop of blood in his body, before which he heard the Vishnu Sahasranamam, and also had him speak about Dharma to Yudhishthira. So Krishna is so protective of his devotees, that because of whatever inability that Bhishma Dev had at that point in time, that very second, that 1 second, and the one drop of blood that was lost by the Draupadi at that moment in the assembly, which was in a way for a Kshatriya very, let's say, an insulting moment. At that point, Krishna made sure that I will only take what Bhishma says after every drop of blood from his body has been taken out. So that goes to show that even Bhishma Dev was unable to protect dharma. We know the case about a case in the war when Yudhishthir was asked to say a lie by Krishna himself. He hesitated and he did not even want to say it. He actually did not lie. He said, I he said Ashwatthama is dead. And then the rest of the sentence, as he was about to complete, the chariot fell down. And because of that sound, the sentence that he said was, I don't know if it was your son or if it's an elephant. Gaja, and I forgot the Sanskrit, but that sentence was kind of covered up by the sound. And as a result, the Dronacharya was lost. And then as a result, he was killed. So he was such an adherent to Dharma. So we will look at few of the questions and we'll see how Yudhishthir always walks the talk. He's always beyond suspicion and he always holds true to Dharma. His entire life is an example of what real Dharma is. And that, I think we were listening to a class by S.P. Swami recently about how a devotee must be beyond suspicion and how the devotee, Maharaj gave the example of Prabhupada. If someone had so much, like every word they speak is noted down, every action they perform is videotaped, and so on. And even then, there was no blemish in his activities. That was Srila Prabhupada. Similarly, if one were to videotape every second of Yudhishthir's life, they could see that he was always following Dharma. There was no second, even when he was by himself, where he did not adhere to Dharma. That is why he's glorified as the greatest king. Everybody wanted him to be king. Nobody hated him. He was everybody loved him, basically. So one of the first questions is, what is dhairyam? Although I don't have the Sanskrit with me, but dhairyam, what is, you could say, who's known as a person who has stability and who is dhira? When you would ask that question, the yaksha asked one of the 124 questions, and to which Yudhishthir says, one who can control his senses is dhairya. And the reason he gives this answer, all of the commentators on that part, they say the reason he gave this answer also, right? So the reason he gave this answer was because we have Vishwamitra Muni, who was, there's this running joke that Indradev has this PDD, or he has penance destruction department, where he would look at some person who is very pious and who might perform sufficient penance to overtake Indra. So he appoints his members from the PDD to destroy their penance. So when Vishwamitra Muni was performing penance to become a Brahma Rishi, at that point in time, he sent Rambha, Menaka, and many other Apsaras to spoil their penance. And at that point, we have Vishwamitra's penance breaking, right? So there was a kind of a chink in his armor. There was a flaw that his penance was not at the highest at that point in time. So that's why he had a child, I think, Shakuntala from Urvashi, or Menaka, I think. Menaka. And then the second time, he knew that I should really control my senses, and this is not an object of my enjoyment. And then he sent Rambha. He cursed Rambha, and as many things happen, but in the end, he actually becomes a Brahma Rishi. And so this was the reason why he gave the example as controlling the senses is important. Because if you see, when Arjuna was in the heavenly abode, Indra, again, he sent members from his BDD. He sent Urvashi to Arjuna. Although this is not to destroy penance, but Arjuna was able to see her as his forefathers, as being the wife of Pururava, who was his forefather. So he did not really have an enjoyership mentality towards Urvashi. He says, I see you as mother. And then she said, how dare you call me a mother? And she cursed him. And then we see how that comes into use later. So another thing that the Yaksha asked is, what is Dambha? Dambha means, in Sanskrit, it means flexing, showing off. What exactly is showing off is what he asks. And then this is a very interesting answer, because Yudhishthir says, showing that we perform dharma is show off. He says, what is it? Dambo Dhwaja Shraya. He says, one who shows off that they perform dharma. So it could be something funny, like there may be some person who may have ill intentions, but when they're opening the door, they're singing the Vishnu Sahasranamam and they're, oh, Hare Krishna, and then they invite you, but internally they are not. Someone who has an external show of dharma, that person is the real person who flexes or shows up. Somebody who shows off some material things, it doesn't matter at all, because it never mattered in the first place. But if someone shows a show of dharma, that is real showing off. Then another very important question is dharmascha arthascha kamascha paraspara virodhinah. So the yaksha asks dharma, artha, and kama. These three seem to have many inconsistencies. How do we harmonize the three of them? Because it seems like if you want dharma, you may have to give up some artha. If you want artha, then if you want kama, then artha is given up. So they are kind of mutually exclusive, in the sense if you attain one, the other cannot be attained, is what it seems. So how do we harmonize them is the question that was asked to Yudhishthira, to which he says, uh, he gives so he says, if the head of the household is in agreement with the conclusions of the Vedas, then dharma, artha, and kama can be unified. So this is very interesting, because generally the head of the household or head of the family is generally thought of to be the male. But Yudhishthir's answer shows that it was actually the presence of a Draupadi who was well versed in the Shastric conclusions was the cause that the Pandavas had dharma, artha, and kama all harmonized, and then they could focus on moksha. So he gives the example of how when it is uncontrolled, like in the case of Kashyapa Muni, when Kashyapa Muni was married to many daughters of Daksha Prajapati, but when he was married to Diti and Aditi, we know this story. When Diti wanted offsprings at the wrong time, she was kind of awarded or cursed with two demoniac sons. Right. So that goes to show that she did not know the Shastri conclusions to that extent. But the real point that Yudhishthira is trying to make is, if the head of the household can and knows the conclusions of the Shastras, only then that will dharma, artha, and kama come together. The next question is, what does the person who follows dharma get? And he gives the example of Vibhishan. Vibhishan gave up everything to attain Lord Ram, and that kind of sacrifice is what one gets when they follow the path of dharma. We see that in the case of Duryodhana, he was born with a silver spoon and he had everything going for him. His parents were willing to align their will with his nefarious activities, and he seemed to have all the comforts anybody could have hoped for. And the Pandavas, by virtue of following dharma, they were seemingly put in immense terrible circumstances, whether it was poisoning, whether it is the lac palace burned, whether it is injustice, whether it's the gambling match, so many different things. It seems like if you follow dharma, you might end up struggling a lot. But at the end, that even during that struggle, the Pandavas headed by Yudhishthira, showed that they always hold strong to dharma. They would not do anything adharmic. And that is why they are glorious, and that is why they please the Lord to whatever extent they have, because obviously they are Nitya Siddhas and associates of the Lord, but they show by example, they show by their lives that just by adhering to dharma, whatever difficulty comes, one can still be happy and satiated in that situation. Which comes to one of the next questions: who is the wealthiest of them all? And to that, we may think, well, probably some Elon Musk or the dictator of Russia or someone like that. But Yudhishthir Maharaj says, one who sees both happiness and sadness equally is the wealthiest of them all. So Krishna says, Yadricha Labha Santushto Dvandvatito Vimatsara Samasiddha Asiddha Cha Kritvapi Na Nibhadyate. Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita 4th chapter that one who sees both happiness and distress equally, only that person is truly wealthy. And it goes to support my previous point that Yudhishthir, whether they were in the forest, whether they had to eat and survive only on fruits and berries, or whether they were in the king getting, you could say, 56 items on their prasadam plate, they saw both of that equally, and as a result, they attained the highest abode. So Okay, then the last four questions are something that I've already repeated, but I'll just for completion, I will come the last four questions of the 124. So, who in this world is happy? And the answer is he who is neither in debt nor exiled and who lives simply, eating simple food in his own home is happy. And the interesting, you could say, the point that the commentators say is that one should cook and honor prasadam between the two muhurtams, between 10:30 to 12, cooking should happen, and 12 to 1:30, honoring the prasadam should happen. If that happens, then that person lives very happily. Then, of course, the most important question that all of you already know: what is the most wonderful thing? Ahani ahani bhutani gachanti yamalayam shesha sthavarachanti kim macharyam param. We see others passing away around us, yet we live as though we will not pass away, and that is the greatest wonder for Yudhishthira Maharaj. And that's why we have in the Bhaja Govindam prayers, it says, Shankaracharya says, Balavastha Krita Saktam. When a person is in the childhood, he indulges in play. He is carefree. Balavastha Krita Saktam. Then he says, Taruna Avastha Taruni Saktam. In youth, he's after Taruni, the opposite gender. Youth, Taruni Sakta. And then Vriddhavastha Chinta Magnam. When he is old, he is already worried about death. So where does he get the time to Kopina, Parama Brahmani Kopina Sakta? Where does he have time to Sakta, to absorb himself in Parama Brahmani, in the Param Atma, Param Purusha? Where does he have the time to do this? Is the question. So we see Yudhishthir from the very beginning, he was always following the path of dharma, and also, let's say, he knew that moksha is the ultimate, and he always kept that as his north star. If whatever step he's taking would help him align to that goal, he would do it. So that is something we see. So we see what are the tidings of this world and how can one find the eternal path of dharma. That's actually the last question. So the tidings in this world are what is the news in this world? It's probably not the stock market. The tidings of this world are that this is a cauldron with the sun as the fire, days and nights as the fuel, and months and seasons as its wooden ladle, and all creatures are being cooked by time. This is something that you could say, if you really think of it as an epiphany, this is what it would be. If you really see, we are all cooked by time. Every second, if whatever we do, whether we absorb ourselves in Harikatha or we take ourselves in Prajal power, whatever, we are still being cooked, and we don't want to be overcooked or undercooked by the time we are there. We want to be perfectly cooked, right? So that we can become an offering to the Supreme Lord. So it goes to show that that is the real news. If we are able to deeply absorb this answer by Yudhishthir, we'll be able to see that his life was actually encompassing all of this until the very end, when actually that also happens. So at the very end, we know that he comes along with the dog, because all the other four brothers and Mother Draupadi have already passed away. And then Indradev asks him, you must leave the dog and you must accompany me. And then Yudhishthir says, this dog has been loyal and devoted to me. Let him come with me. O great king of the gods, it is difficult for a noble person to do an ignoble deed. I do not wish for glory if it means abandoning the one who is devoted to me. So, because of that, uh, Indra was pleased that even at this point in time, when it was time for him to go back to his spiritual abode, he was unwilling to give up on dharma. There are many cases in which, actually, I wanted to give the example of politics, because we're talking about king. There are some political parties in India who are headed by, I could say, IITians and very well learned people, and they wanted to bring about change. I'm sure many of you know who I'm talking about. But and the main thing that they wanted to counter was corruption. But when they were put in a position with all the wealth and everything, they were corrupted by it, and they themselves became corrupt. So it is very hard for one to see someone in a different position with different avenues for whatever sense gratification and say, oh, they're imperfect. But when one is actually put in that situation, it may become a very difficult deed for one to stave off all of those enemies. So yeah, and then Yudhishthir Pandita Samadarshana, he sees them as friend. He says, this dog has taken refuge with me. I will not abandon one who's devoted to me. that would be the sin equal to killing a woman, robbing a Brahman, and harming a friend. And then Lord Indra says, King, you are the greatest of kings with intelligence, morality, and compassion. You have given up the chariot to heaven for the sake of a loyal dog. Because of this, you have gained the highest heaven, is what Indra tells him. Now, after we went back and forth, so we'll come back to the Yaksha Prashna. So at the end, the Yaksha's final question was, okay, so I can revive one of your four brothers who are lying here. Who would you like it to be? I cannot do justice to what is written in the Mahabharata, but I'll just read it out. The Yaksha smiled. You have rightly answered every question. Tell me which of your brothers you wish to have restored to life. And then he says, Maharaj Yudhishthira says, O Yaksha, let Nakula, as tall as a sal tree and endowed with a broad chest and long arms, be brought to life. So surely he wanted to, Dharmaraj was a little surprised by that answer, because surely if he wanted to win the war, he would need either Bhima or Arjuna. Arjuna had all of the Pashupati Astra and so many things from the heavenly abode. He was probably the main man if he were to win the war. And so the Yaksha was surprised. Bhimsen is surely more important to you than Nakula, O king, and Arjuna is your chief support. Why do you ask for Nakula to be revived? And so at that time he says, Dharmo rakshati rakshataha. He says, he who sacrifices virtue is himself destroyed, and he who preserves virtue is in turn preserved by it. I am therefore careful to always observe virtue. For me, great virtue lies in refraining from cruelty. It is superior to all worldly gain. Thus, I ask for Nakula. Both Kunti and Madri are the same to me. In myself, Kunti still has one son, but Madri now has none. With a desire to behave equally toward my two mothers, I ask for the life of Nakula. And this it brings about a certain peace when you just read this. And Dharmaraj was so happy that he had a son who was as adherent to Dharma as Yudhishthira Maharaj. And he says, I will give you a boon. So generally, when devatas are pleased, they generally give a boon. And so Yudhishthira, he had everything to ask for, but he said, can you please give the stick that the Brahmana needed for his sacrifice? He could have asked for anything, but he did his duty even in that point in time. And so he was pleased. So he got 1+1. Okay, I will do this. I'll give you another wish. So he says, even then he asked for something very, very small. He asked for something like, when we go to Agyatavas, when we have to live in incognito, just make sure no one recognizes us. They are like the greatest celebrities of that time. How will they live in incognito without being, exposed? So he says, that's simple. You ask for something better. And that wish is what we have in today's verse. So he says, protect me from avarice, folly, and anger. So we see in today's verse, the very first vice that Prabhupada mentions is characterized by increasing avarice, greed. So he says, protect me from avarice, folly, and anger, and make sure and please ensure that I give in charity, take to austerity, and always take shelter of truth, dharma. So this is what a real Raja Rishi is. Chaitanya Prabhu mentions in one of his classes that these are the three qualities: lack of avarice, no folly. He knows he gambled, but he didn't gamble because of folly. He gambled because he was adherent to his elders' words. Narad Muni came and said, if you don't listen to your elders, there might be some fight. Actually, listening to the elders caused the fight. That is ironic, but avarice, folly, and anger are the three qualities that he did not want. And if you see, they cover all of the vices one could possibly have. And giving in charity, austerity, and truth. These Nivriti and Pravriti Marg, not wanting to do this and wanting to do these three things, made him the Rajrishi that he is known for. With that, I would like to conclude today's class. And I probably went over time, but I had a few more points to mention, but we'll stop here. Thank you very much. I would like to receive some corrections so that I may improve the presentation of Srimad Bhagavatam. Thank you to everybody. Hare Krishna.
I really like the point where you mentioned Raja means one who has conquered the land without, and Maharaj is somebody who has conquered the land within. In Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says that we are all Kshetrajñas. This body is a land that is given to a living entity. So one who can win land outside, he is known as Raja, but one who can conquer this land, which is made up of 10 senses. He can be Dashratha, or he is a Maharaj Dashratha or Maharaj Vishal. Very nice.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing us beautiful stories and the 5 gems of Mahabharata. We would like to hear maybe more about those. Just like you mentioned Yaksha Krishna, maybe you can take a series of classes on Yaksha Krishna and then later on other 4. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Anybody else has any question or reflections?
Is it possible to repeat the 5? I missed one of them.
Yes, bro. So it is the Vidura Niti, then Sanat Sujatiyam, then Yaksha Prashna, Bhagavad Gita, and Vishnu Sahasranama.
Thank you.
Which commentary are you reading?
These are actually from many collections of talks or from many speakers, like just collated whatever I've heard from before. So I haven't read any commentary per se of the Mahabharata.
Is there someone you recommend in order to go through a deeper study of Mahabharata?
So there's this Mahabharat character series by Chaitanya Charan Prabhu. So he goes into a lot of depth. I think all of these I would listen to some of the questions. I put him on 0.5x and then noted down exactly what he said, so that I can repeat those questions as it is, like what he spoke to Indra in the end, because I may say it, but it might not have the same effect. So what he told Nakula, all of those are like word to word. But the commentaries, I think they're from different classes, so they're not from a specific one. So some were in, could say, Amrendra Prabhu's classes, some from Chaitanya Charan Prabhu. And so. Sorry, that's not a good answer, but sorry, Prabhu. Can you stop here?
Before.
Should I-
Yeah.